So we're going to talk to you about what we've done over the past 4 years. We kind of started a journey with USA Today where we went from a place of being really siloed to a place of having really awesome communication and being very crystal clear with what other teams are doing inside of our company, and also having much more progressive technology. So we're going to kind of take you through that journey. So my name is Bridget Lane. I work for, obviously, USA Today. I work on the Developer Solutions team.
And my name is Chris Vincent. I am the manager of the Developer Solutions team here at the USA Today Network. So who is the USA Today Network? You'll know us by our flagship property, USA Today, but we're much larger than that. We also have 120 plus properties across the country. This really leads to some great investigative journalism, being able to pull those resources from those local news markets and really dig into some news stories. Things like the Olympics abuse investigation, teachers leaving their states after being suspended and things like that are some of the investigative journalism we're able to accomplish with those local markets.
We worked the Larry Nassar case.
We did. So we also recently announced Local IQ. So this is from a consolidation of a couple acquisitions that we've had between Reach Local and Suite IQ. So this is for helping businesses be able to advertise and understand their engagement with their consumers a little bit easier from a news media perspective. So Bridget, do you want to talk a little bit about where we were 4 years ago before we started this migration?
I would love to. So 4 years ago, we were in a place of silos. So we were very siloed from an organization perspective, and what I mean by that is not knowing what's really the big priorities for other teams. What are their quarter one or quarter two goals? What are their yearly goals? What is it that they want to do? So your goals aren't really lining up. We also had little to no interteam communication. So as far as just talking to each other, figuring out what other teams are doing, figuring out what would help other teams so that you can come to the table with things that are not only helpful for you, but helpful for them, that communication wasn't happening, and we didn't have a lot of ways to go about fostering it. We were also had a very throw over the wall mentality. So essentially for us, we would have one application and you would create the application and then someone else would do the QE for it and then someone else would deploy it, and you didn't really have the full scope of what was going on, so you didn't really care about what the other teams were doing, what the other teams were struggling with. You just kind of chuck it over the wall to them. And technically, we were not in a wonderful space. We had a lot of pets and we did not have a lot of cattle. And all of our primary applications were being pretty much manually installed in a physical data center, which obviously is not a really great thing to do, especially when you're USA Today and you could get a high bump in traffic and it's just not super duper wonderful. So that's kind of where we were.
Right, and then so this is actually where Bridget and I both came into Gannett, USA Today. We both came in on the platform engineering group. So one of our first core tenets to really get us out of that data center and make sure that we're driving the right culture was infrastructure as code. So the quote-unquote DevOps at the team at the time came in and wrote a bunch of chef cookbooks to really kind of extend the infrastructure that we wanted developers to be able to access. And then from there, we put on top of that a cloud management platform called Scalar. So this is really nice because it gives development teams the ability to come in and just kind of select in a drop-down the cookbooks that they want for their infrastructure, and it just kind of automates away a lot of the knowledge that you need to do to get onto a cloud provider. Speaking of cloud providers, Gannett over the last 4 years has made a lot of transition into different cloud providers. Like Bridget mentioned, originally we were in a physical data center. Our initial migration was mainly to Amazon AWS, but then because of using Scalar and the cloud management platform that we have, we were actually able to test out different cloud providers like Azure and Google Cloud. And actually over the last year, we've migrated 60% of our workloads to Google Cloud pretty seamlessly because of having all these tools and infrastructure code and things like that in place. So not only is the cloud platform necessarily changing all the time here at Gannett, but we're also iterating on the actual technology that's underlying for those development teams to use. So like I said, Amazon, we started, those were EC2 instances, those are VMs. And then from there, we migrated to a containerized platform. So we were running Kubernetes on Amazon EC2 hosts. And then we got even from there to a more hosted platform. So now we're running all of these containers in GKE, and we actually have other teams that are digging into things like Computed Edge with Google Cloud Function and Amazon Lambda. So obviously the platform engineering team over the last few years had to have grown. We started with a team of 5 or 6 people, and since that time we've grown exponentially. We've actually broken the platform engineering group out into 6 teams now. So we have a team for cloud engineering that's responsible for picking cloud tooling that's going to help development teams do their jobs better, things like Vault, things like Chef, things like Scalar. We also have a cluster operations team. I mentioned that we moved to a containerized platform and you're using GKE for that. Cluster operations team has really been at the forefront of driving us to that. They've given us some great tools to be able to migrate to the GKE platform from our own built Kubernetes clusters. So that migration was really easy because of having that team able to focus on that effort. We also have an SRE team for managing the infrastructure behind some of our core applications like USA Today and the 120 plus properties. We need to have a team that's checking the costs on those things, making sure they're highly available and stuff like that. We have one group called API Services that actually has two teams here at Gannett. So they recently just created a new content API that drives all of the actual asset data here at Gannett. So we have a new application that's written in Go using GraphQL, really pushing forward the technology platform that we didn't use before to drive that content in a meaningful way. And then on the back end of that, obviously people are ingesting that content. So we have another team that's responsible for working with people like Facebook and Twitter to bring in those assets and make sure that they're treating those assets with care and respect. And then obviously last but not least, the developer solutions team, that is mine and Bridget's team. We are responsible for creating developer tools here at Gannett to make the developers' jobs easier. So whether that's writing a Go API to help them deploy their code or to tag their code or to manage release notes, we take care of all of that. But we're also responsible for our shared services, things like Fastly, who we use for our CDN, or Apogee for our API gateway. Our team is responsible for coming to teams and evangelizing what those vendors can do for us and how you should come on the platform for those things.
Yeah, one of our engineers, Al, is bald, and I'm trying to convince him to get a henna tattoo that says DevSol on his forehead. So tweet that if you like that idea, and I'm going to use that to pressure him. So, yeah. Anyway, so where are we now? So we were in a very siloed space, and now we've moved much more to a space where we have shared resources and collaboration. We have inter-team collaboration through different things that we've set up to actually communicate with each other and actually make sure that people are aware of our priorities and what our different goals are. This is stuff like newsletters, quarterly meetings that we have set up, meetings between just our managers to make sure that they know what's going on in the nitty-gritty for each of their sprints every single time that it's happening. And those have really upped the amount of communication between teams. We also have inter-team communication, which is similar, but I would categorize that in different kind of ways. Basically, what I'm talking about here is Slack and your developers actually talking to one another. This is not communication that management is doing. This is communication that you, as an engineer, are doing with other people on other teams, which we have really heavily started to focus on. We do have open Slack channels, so our team is like 5 people, and we have probably 80 people in our Slack channel that will talk to us, kind of know what our priorities are going on. And that communication is focused much more heavily on developers themselves. So we've also moved from this model where we were throwing things over the wall to a full stack engineering model. So it is really the precedent now that if you're a developer and you're working on an application, you're going to be responsible for that application from inception to delivery, to monitoring it, to making sure that it's up all the time, and you're doing all of that. Our whole team, like the 6 teams that Chris just went over, those are all just providing the platform. Our developers use and consume that platform, but they do all of it themselves, which in 4 years, that's a pretty drastic change from developers who are used to just writing code and then shipping that code. So that's a total change. Technically, we talked about that physical data center, things being manually installed, and all of our primary applications are now moved to GKE. So obviously, this is a huge difference from where we were having pets, manually installing things, to having all of those massive applications on GKE. And it's also been a huge cost savings, obviously, making that migration. So.
Absolutely, and I think the migration to GKE and all of these points that Bridget just highlighted really freed up our platform engineering team to focus on more than just trying to keep infrastructure up, trying to build those pets and make sure that they're available. So it's really given us the freedom to dig into some more bleeding edge technologies like ITSIO, Envoy, edge computing, things that we want to be delivering to our development teams, but we didn't really have time before. Because of these things, we're able to actually focus on those core tenets and push those technology things forward.
Right, so we've talked a lot about the changes that we made and why we think that they're cool changes. So let's talk about how we started to push those changes forward. So the first thing that we did was focus on making our tech stack a lot fresher than it currently is. This was something that we found not only interesting to do, but also a little bit challenging. So we try to stay up to date with the latest trends, and that does not mean just blindly investing in the newest thing in the industry, but that does mean really impressing our engineers with the fact that it's everyone's responsibility to stay up to date with what's going on in the industry and to constantly be evaluating if there's something that we need or something that we could use to make our products better for other people.
And I think actually to that point, open source has been something that we've been recently kind of digging into because of trying to stay up to date and trying to stay as fresh as we can. And I think Bridget actually has a couple of good points around open source for this one.
Yeah, so actually because we have been switching our technologies and changing technologies, I'm actually a Terraform provider maintainer now because we started to use Terraform really heavily. And I think Terraform is one of the best examples of my next point, which is about how do you choose technology that you actually want to invest time in? There's always something new coming down the pike, but how do you say, okay, this is actually worth our investment, this is something we should actually spend time on, and the number one thing for us is if it's going to make other people's lives easier. So we mentioned consuming the platform and that we want everyone to do DevOps. It's not like a thing that we could do for everyone, even if we wanted to. There's no way we could do it. We're too large of a company. So we have to have tools that are going to make it easy for them to get on our platform, to stay on our platform, and to actually have a positive experience using our platform. And Terraform is one of those tools. We have contributed back heavily to a number of Terraform providers because they just weren't up to par with things that we needed or they didn't have features we needed. And Terraform, if you're not familiar with Terraform, it's basically just a resource configuration language. So it allows you to edit a resource without really having full access to it is basically how we use it. So if there's like a Fastly service you need to edit or something, you can do that through a Terraform document without actually having access to Fastly itself. You just have access to what we give you access to. So Terraform has been really influential there.
Right, and we really try to encourage some of Bridget's things that she was talking about digging into open source and wanting to contribute and wanting to push forward those tools because it helps us push ourselves forward here at USA Today. Obviously, just picking technologies isn't going to always win out for us for what we're trying to build for the various things that we're trying to do. So one of the ways that we also try to be innovative within our own teams is we host hackathons. So for those of you who aren't familiar about hackathons, essentially bring together a small group of developers, give them a common goal, have a competition around it, give them a prize at the end. So Gannett has hosted quite a few of these. We've actually hosted a Slackathon as well, where the premise was to create Slack applications to make your day easier in Slack.
Because we love Slack.
Absolutely, we're big Slack users here. But the hackathons are really interesting from my perspective because we don't just keep them to internal teams. So it's not just my team and the other platform engineering teams trying to come up with something. We actually invite other corporations in the Tysons-McLean area, which is where our headquarters is located. We actually invite college students from the local campuses to come in and be part of those teams so that they can see what it's like to work with a group of engineers. It also is obviously a great recruiting tool for us because we're able to push that culture forward, both from the community of other companies around us as well as students coming in to get to be a part of that. Bridget, what's actually your favorite thing about hackathons?
The free food. But no, seriously. When we talk about hackathons, I've read this concern on Twitter lately. I've heard some stuff about hackathons like, oh, you're always creating new technologies and you're focusing on new technologies, but what about your technical debt? What about your old technologies? Like, where is the priority for fixing that stuff? And I do want to note that we are super duper conscientious of this. This is something that I think really impacts your engineers' happiness and their health in their day-to-day life. You can be investing in the cool new stuff all you want, giving them chances to dive in, giving them chances to do POCs. That's great. Someone's going to get stuck with the shit job of cleaning all of your technical debt up unless you're spreading it out amongst engineers, amongst teams, and you as managers are recognizing that you need to tackle this problem. So while we do hold hackathons and slackathons, and we're constantly investing and we're constantly looking at stuff like this, I think it's really, really important to note that if you are trying to push dramatic change in your organization, you need to have some priorities for going back and cleaning that up and not just letting it build to the point that it's going to frustrate someone or just become a really horrible thing that you have to clean up. So in that vein of thought, let's talk about employee happiness. So we all know that people can get comfortable. That's not everybody. Some people love change. Some people really thrive in that environment. But a lot of people like to be comfortable. I mean, they like job security. They like to feel like, they're in a place where they're safe, they know it's going to happen every day. So what happens when you start pushing change in your organization? And what happens when that change starts to snowball and impact their day-to-day life, their jobs, the technologies that they're using, and what happens to those really good employees who maybe aren't the most comfortable with change? So there are a couple things that we do. We have a really high retention rate in our branch. I have been there 3.5 years, and I think I've seen 3 people leave, and we've grown to about 60 people in our platform organization from like a handful of people when I started. So we've grown a lot, and we've lost a very little. One of the most important things, I think, is a culture of freedom for your engineers. This is really, really important. We're not going to babysit anyone. You have the chance to do what you want to do. Obviously, you're supposed to finish your tasks. Obviously, we expect that if we task you with something, you're going to do it and you're going to finish it. But no one's going to babysit you or police you through it. We do stand-ups. We do like little touch bases. But other than that, you're kind of given free rein. If there is a time you want to work or you want to be a little bit more flexible, that's fine. And that is a nice thing for engineers to come in and to have that flexibility. And that's a perk that in times of change can kind of comfort them a little bit. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think it's more than necessarily just the freedom and the flexibility of your work schedule or being able to work remotely. We're a highly distributed team. It's also about, regardless of your title, if you're a junior, if you're a senior on the team, if you're the manager, your ideas should be just as valuable as anyone on the teams. And our SVP actually recently sent out a video to all of our employees and had a really good quote that I want to share with you. It's, "Ideas should come from anywhere. Your title should not indicate your ability to contribute to our roadmap and our goals." And I thought this really resonated, especially with our talk, and the timing was perfect for this because that is exactly how we drive things. It doesn't matter if I just hired you 2 weeks ago and you've come on a developer solutions team and you have an idea because this development team said that this isn't working for them. They need something more. They need another tool. I want to hear that. I want to get that feedback because when we bring all of those ideas to the table and we're willing to listen to everyone, we get some really interesting ideas from everyone contributing.
Yeah, and subpoint, this is our SVP. So a little note on this, there's a huge difference between talking about everything that we're saying and actually backing it up. This is our SVP backing us up. And that is extremely important. As a developer, if you want to see change, you can try and push it all you want, but there's got to be someone backing you. There's got to be people from management that are behind this. And that's like, there's a difference. People aren't going to come to the table with ideas if you don't back them occasionally.
Right, and one of the quotes that you gave me was talking about these problems and talking about the solutions that we want to do is not the same as investing the time to do those things. Yeah. And I actually have a couple examples. So from the hackathons that I was mentioning earlier, we actually created a kind of fun application during one of those hackathons that is called PR Manager. So this is actually one of our most widely adopted tools on the developer solutions team now.
If you're wondering, my icon is a dinosaur burping a rainbow. Sorry, I felt the need to point that out. Continue.
So during the hackathon, we created this awesome application to let teams come in, post their link, and then they get cool emojis posted as it goes through the workflow. So if someone's taking a look at it, you get eyes. When you get approval, you get that thumbs up, and then you get the merged icon. So really just kind of trying to drive communication through Slack around PRs and things like that. This was a 6-hour project that we did in a hackathon, just kind of messing around. And we actually got approval to productionize this. So this is actually one of our development tools that we actually evangelize to all the teams. And like I said before, it's actually our most widely adopted tool on developer solutions. So coming out of that hackathon, it's really cool to see us investing in productionizing those tools.
Yeah.
So getting away from the actual technical implications, let's talk a little bit about one-on-ones. So my team, the developer solutions team, we have one-on-ones with each of our employees monthly. So I actually have scheduled time for 30-minute conversations every single month with every single employee. This is really a great time for us to have some two-way feedback, some great communication, some time for us to get to know each other, know where we're at, and know where we want to go. So a lot of times I start these with, hey, like, how are you doing? How do you like the team? How do you like the technology you've been working on? Do you like the projects that are on our roadmap for the next quarter? And we just kind of go from there. We talk through where this person wants to go with their career over the next couple of years. We really try to make sure that we're putting people in a situation where they feel like they can give us just as much feedback as we're giving them.
Yeah, a lot of people do one-on-ones, but it's like one person talking at another person. It's not one-on-one, like a two-way conversation. Because there's certainly feedback that you can and should be giving to your superiors, definitely, all the time. And that feedback has to be encouraged.
So speaking to our one-on-ones, like I mentioned that we do them monthly. Bridget and I have had obviously many one-on-ones since I've become her manager, and I mentioned that it's a two-way street for communication. So I've given Bridget feedback and said, like, as you want to be promoted to a senior on this team and you're going to take on some of those roles, you have to do more on mentoring. You have to meet people halfway. You have to talk to people a certain way. And in that same exact meeting, Bridget's willing to hold me accountable and say, well, Chris, I have teams that are coming to me asking me requests all the time, and you're not stepping up as my manager to tell them no. We need to prioritize this. We need to bring it into tickets. And it's been really amazing for us to work together in those one-on-one times because I've been able to grow as a manager. I know I started making changes immediately after she gave that feedback. And same thing with Bridget. She's been able to grow and to accept that communication and to grow within her own career.
Yeah, so speaking of feedback, I think that this is one thing that we push a lot with our engineers, and one thing that I think makes a much more valuable engineer. And that's an engineer that knows how to give feedback and knows that they should be coming to the table with feedback. It's one thing to come in every day and churn tickets and do your job. I mean, that's great if that's what you want to do. But as an engineer, you're in a different category when you not only are churning tickets and doing your job, but you're coming to the table with feedback, architectural feedback, product feedback, things that you like, things that you don't like. Maybe it's feedback about the way that someone handled something. But when you have an opinion about what you're doing, that translates to passion about what you're doing. And that is a very important quality in an engineer.
Right. And speaking of that healthy engineer or that culture that we want to drive around that, we have a few pillars that we wanted to talk to today. The first one being blameless postmortems. I know that at Velocity Conference, a lot of people have mentioned these. So whenever a developer makes a mistake, you have to be willing to let them make that mistake and just talk about it and do better from there forward. You can't necessarily come in and blame them. You can't come in and make them feel bad about the mistake that they had, because developers are expected to be honest. So whenever they make mistakes, they should come to the team and explain what the mistake was. And it's not just their team. When we have postmortems, we don't just invite the team that actually took the application down. We invite our whole product technology group. Everyone's welcome to come sit in, ask questions, get understanding. And it's really led to some great postmortems for us to get a lot of understanding from a lot of unique perspectives.
Yeah, and I've definitely been on the other end of that where that's not going on, and I can tell you it's a lot worse when you're pretending like an incident your team caused just impacted you, because that is never the case, ever.
Right, and like I said, this is a time for both managers and other developers to come in and to listen and ask questions. This isn't a time to berate, diminish, or reprimand. The only thing that we can do with outages and things that we've caused issues with is make sure that we're not making people feel bad, that we're creating tickets in the backlog to make sure that another developer doesn't wind up in the same spot that this person did, so that they have trust in their own code and their own application so that they don't have to go through a postmortem for the same thing.
So in that line of thought, I'd like to talk about giving and receiving criticism. So this is something that's really, really important that we try to impress on our engineers and also just everyone else at our company. There are two parts to this: knowing how to give criticism and knowing how to receive criticism. And once you learn how to do both of those things, I think you'll find that your engineering culture becomes much more open and a much healthier place to be. So the first side of that is learning how to receive criticism. So I know as an engineer, it can be really hard when you work on something and you put a lot of time into something and it kind of becomes like your child, or maybe it's your team's child. But you have to remember that your perspective is normally a little bit one-sided towards you, right? That's what makes the world a great place. Everyone's got a little bit of a different perspective. Everyone can see something that you can't always see on your own. Learning that you are better when you get criticism for the things that you do is very important to learn, so that you're not shutting the door to people who might be able to give you feedback about what can make your product better. Instead of viewing criticism as, oh my God, someone criticized my application, this is horrible, viewing it as, oh, this is wonderful. Someone gave me something that I can improve. Someone gave me something that I can make better. That's a much healthier outlook on the criticism that you're getting, and you're going to wind up with a better product at the end of the day if you can receive that criticism. The other flip side of that is being able to give that criticism. If you care about me, if you care about a product I'm making, if you care about something my team's doing, or even just our company goals in general, if I produce something, you need to give me constructive criticism about that. Two things are unhelpful. One, if you tell me that it's amazing, that's awesome, keep doing the thing, that's not helpful. You know why? Because it's not true. Nothing's ever done, nothing's ever perfect, nothing is ever amazing, nothing can't be improved. And two, if you're just like, well, that's bad, or you tell your team members, oh my God, that product's bad, and it doesn't even get back to me, that's also not helpful. Do you care about the product that's being produced? Because if you do, you'd come to me and you would give me constructive criticism. That's great, that's bad. Here's what you can do to make it better. Here's what I think you should do to make it better. That's valuable feedback. So learning to give and receive that feedback is something that we really, really value at Gannett.
Right, and obviously a lot of that will happen in the code review process, so driving to the next point. Code reviews are not always this fun thing that developers like to do. You're kind of presenting your scope of work for some other people to take a look at, and you're usually expecting some comments, some negative feedback, some changes that you need to make. And we try to make sure that, to Bridget's point about giving and receiving criticism, we make sure that the comments that we're putting on people's PRs are constructive. We're saying the code will operate better if we do it this way, or variable naming is important here because when someone comes back to this, we want to make sure that they don't have 10 minutes to go look up what this is. So little things like that, we try to make sure that our whole culture at Gannett is driving that across teams, not just within our developer solutions team, but outside of platform engineering across the 30 plus development teams that we have at USA Today. The other one that we have is code sharing. So it's not just the code that we're producing, but it's talking about the journey that we've had. So we have internal groups that we meet every couple weeks, and we talk about special interests. So whether that's Golang or that's some of the demos that a certain team is wanting to present for some of the features that they were able to produce the last sprint, we try to make sure that we're creating avenues for us to talk about those journeys and to let other people come in and say, okay, I can take your idea and I can springboard from here. I don't need to reinvent the wheel for the first half of this application because I heard your presentation about this. So that really gives us some avenues to speed up our time to production. And then the other side of this is taking all of the information that we just talked about and making sure that you're eating that feedback and giving them the teams that they need. So if a team is coming to us and saying like your support time isn't as good as it should be, we're going to take that into account and we're going to look at what it would mean to spawn out a support team. I mentioned that we've spawned 6 teams within platform engineering. Each time that we've done that, it was because we had development teams that were part of this cycle, part of the postmortems, part of code reviews, coming into us and saying, we need to see a team that's focused on this because it'll drive our business needs this much faster. So really making sure that we're creating teams that are going to give positive impact to those other teams at Gannett. So for me personally, this has been an awesome journey at Gannett. I have been here for 3.5 years. I was self and industry taught. I've worked, this is my 4th career job. I've worked in nonprofits and telecom. But coming to Gannett was an interesting journey for me. I actually applied for a senior engineering role and I did not have the experience for that. So going through the interview process and realizing near the end of that I didn't have the experience for that senior role that I'd applied for, it actually turned into a really interesting conversation with my boss. I explained to him that I didn't feel like I had the experience to take on that senior role, but that I really have the grit and determination to learn new technology, and I really liked what USA Today was doing. And he's like, great, we'll give you a mid-level position. We expect you to grow within that because your willingness to learn, your willingness to adapt new technology, and the attitude that you have towards those things. And it's been a really fun journey for me because I was promoted to senior about a year and a half ago now. And then 6 months ago, I actually just got my first management position. So it's been interesting to see that his banking on me was correct because giving me that opportunity and me being willing to learn really encouraged me to grow my own career here. And I feel like it's impacted teams. But not just from a technical standpoint. The flexibility that we talked about that our engineering culture drives at Gannett freed me up to move from Florida to Colorado with my wife and 2 kids. So that was obviously a journey. And then the other side of that is I try to make sure that at Gannett we have a good culture in Slack and how people are talking to each other. So I've actually contributed over 600 emojis to our Slack presence at Gannett. I am definitely by far the highest contributor there, but I just try to make sure that everyone has a good time when you're communicating with each other and trying to make sure that we're all pushing each other forward.
That's a very important contribution. Yeah, so for me, I've had a bit of a journey also. I've been with Gannett about 3.5-ish years now. The first year was an intern, so I was kind of like there, and then I wasn't there, and then I came back. But in my 2.5 years full time, I've learned a lot. I've spoken at 3 major conferences. I'm going to be speaking at Velocity EU, so if you happen to be in London, come see me. I'm also, as I already mentioned, a Terraform open source maintainer, which is awesome and very fulfilling. And I have arguably the most important meme in this deck, even though Chris can take credit for all the rest of them, and I've tweeted about it multiple times. It's Miss Frizzle. So I'm just going to take a moment of silence for everyone to look at this. All right, it's done. But this is extremely important. Anyway, so if I'm going to leave you with one thing today, and you only walk away with one thing from this, and then you go, get drunk and like completely forget about this talk, it's that if you have change that you want to see happen, whether it's technical or whether it's personal, maybe it's change with people, maybe it's change with specific technology, you need to drive that with passion. Because at the end of the day, the only way you're going to see drastic change, in my opinion, that is really effective and wide-reaching is if you do that by pushing passion in your organization, whether that's in your engineers, in the way that you adapt your culture so that they become more passionate about what they're doing, more passionate about the products that they're making, or whether that's from you because you're just really excited about what you're doing and you're really behind it. But that needs to be your driving factor behind that change.
Right, and that is the conclusion. Wrapping up, I want to say that USA Today is constantly hiring great engineers. I mentioned that we are highly distributed. I think we're across over 20 states now.
So I wrote on the job sign and got like neon all over my hand.
We are constantly trying to hire new engineers. We're also very active in the community around the technology that we're implementing and how we're doing that. So check us out on Medium. We try to blog about the tech journey that we've had here and the things that we've implemented. And also hit Bridge and I up on Twitter. We're constantly trying to take in new ideas. We're always willing to have a conversation around making ourselves or USA Today better, or if you have ideas for your own organization that you'd like us to bounce those off of, come up and find us. We'd definitely be willing to hear those. If anyone has any questions, we have a few minutes for questions. Otherwise, I'll let you all get to your drinks. Man in the back first, then I'll grab you.
You said 4 years ago it was kind of siloed. What was the catalyst to get that going? Was it a person? Was it a group? Was it bottom up, top down?
So 4 years ago, our company actually kind of pivoted. So they realized that print media is not necessarily going to continue in the form that it is today. So 4 years ago, our organization made the decision that we're taking a very digital first approach. And with that came, we were going to need to look at our infrastructure. And so we hired a DevOps team to come in and start to assess. And then over 6 months after that assessment, we started to actually dig in and implement a lot of these things that we talked about today.
And pretty quickly strike the word DevOps and decided that our mentality needed to be everyone needed to be DevOps because we're way too large of an organization to do that for people.
Right. Go ahead.
That actually was a question I do have. So you said that there's no babysitting. So what's your junior to senior ratio, and how do you ensure that technical aptitude is not structured?
Sure. So we honestly are pretty bad with titles. It's not really like, it's not our strong suit, all right? So you could have everyone is a mid and there's definitely ranges and talents and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's coming to the table and actually looking at your work output, which definitely still happens, right? So you're picking up tickets, and at the end of the sprint, you can see what tickets people did, what they went through, and it's how long it's taking you to get through different processes. And on the senior side of that, it's whether or not your seniors are appropriately mentoring and lifting up your junior developers rather than just being rock stars and outputting as much as humanly possible. Are they lifting the people around them up as well? So typically we tend to have, a senior, a junior, a mid at the very least. Sometimes you have more or less of one or the other depending on the team. But the goal there is not that we're titling them by that and then they're moving up due to titles. It's that it's pretty apparent without us having to babysit what people are doing and what they're not doing at the end of the day. Yeah.
Good.
So I have a question about the comment you made about flexibility for your engineers. It starts with, so were you guys agile 4 years ago when you started?
No.
Yeah, so that was another part of the journey we didn't really speak about. So it was very waterfall before.
So one of the things I've had pushing a team to agile is this notion of flexibility. They actually feel like they're being micromanaged a little bit with tools like Jira. Did you have to kind of do that balance between, you can work from wherever you want, but I do actually know everything you're doing?
Yeah, so did you have something to say?
Sure. So From my perspective as a manager on a team with dealing with remotes, we really try to make sure that actually all of our managers are remote as well. So we really understand what it means to try to communicate and push those things and be in a distributed environment. The other thing we try to do is we make sure that our development teams are part of the actual sprint planning process, so that they're part of picking on the work that they're wanting to be working on. And then our constant stand-ups or one-on-ones are a great avenue for me to make sure that they're hitting the metrics that I expect, but also that they're growing within their own role. So they feel like they have some autonomy there because I'm coming to the team and saying, all right, we have 10 Q4 priorities. I know that you all want to do some Go development this sprint because we've been doing migrations the last 2. Which one do you want to work on? And really letting the team kind of prioritize and work within their own merits to work on priorities that the company has.
Yeah, and so some of the complaints that I've heard about Agile from other developers who don't work for Gannett and who don't like it is that they get really, really micromanaged. So for instance, in backlog grooming, maybe they have a comment and that's kind of squelched by whoever's running backlog grooming, or maybe they feel like they have to make a ticket for every tiny little thing that comes along. And there is, you can become really, really micromanaged in Agile. We take the opposite approach. So we are kind of our own product managers. It's really something the team owns. If I want to do something, I make an epic for it and I put it in the next sprint. And then we all get together as a team and we look at that. And we're not super duper strict with acceptance criteria. We have a set of standards, but if an engineer is like, this is killing me, we're like, all right, let's change. Let's do something different. So we take Agile as a guideline. We don't take it as a very strict thing that we follow. There is flexibility there, and I think that that's why our engineers really like it, because it's actually just me making tickets I want to do and then doing them. So.
Any more questions? All right, one more in the back, and then we'll call it good.
Was it a challenge against management to let you guys do hackathons?
I think it was more challenging from bringing other companies in. Doing internal hackathons was not super difficult to get us time and priority to do that. Engaging with other companies as well as the campuses, I think, was the more difficult part for us to get buy-in. But like I said, it was a really good recruiting opportunity for us, so that was a lot of the angle that we took for getting the organization above us to give us that time and money to be able to do so.
Are we out of time? Do we have time for the one more? Did you have one? Oh.
All right.
I like it.
Like I
it's
said,
good.
If anyone has any more questions for Bridget or I, we'll be around the conference tomorrow as well. Track one of us down, hit us up on Twitter. Otherwise, we'll be around for a few more minutes. Thank you all for coming to our talk. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thanks, guys.